Welcome to an extraordinary interview with my good friend Finn Handley. Finn's unique encounters with black triangle UFOs are nothing short of astounding. He's witnessed 3 such incredible sightings. Here's a sneak peek of what's in store.
I saw 2 balls of light dropping out of the sky about 300 meters away. And it was 2, for want of a better term, it was 2 orbs, so 2 spheres of amber-colored light, and they were corkscrewing around each other as they came down out of the sky.
But that's just the beginning. Finn holds a unique position in the UFO community. He's possibly the only person on Earth creating custom UFO animations for experiencers, offering this remarkable service completely free of charge. His work isn't just detailed, it's a vivid gateway into these mysterious encounters. For anyone fascinated by black triangle UFOs, this interview is an absolute must-watch. You're about to dive into a world of unexplained phenomena and breathtaking stories. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Finn. We've been friends for quite a while now. We talk often. It's an honor and a pleasure to get you on the show with me. You have a really interesting trajectory when it comes to engaging the phenomenon, as James Iandoli would put it. So the first question I'm going to ask you before getting into your incredible animations that you make of people's sightings, which, by the way, you do for absolutely free and you put a whole lot of time and effort into. How did you get into the UFO phenomena, number one? And then how much longer after that did you actually have your first sighting?
Well, yeah, first, thanks for having me on, Ryan. It's a bit of a long story and a convoluted one with my own entry into the subject. It was late 2006, early 2007, and I was I think I'd run out of computer games to play or something like that, because that was my hobby at the time, and got a bit bored, so I was just searching for stuff on YouTube, just randomly looking for something to pass the time, and I came across the now infamous 2001 press conference with Stephen Greer. And because I'm from the UK, from a pretty small town, I was not aware of this thing that people now call disclosure. I was not aware that there were military whistleblowers and that kind of thing, or at the very least people from within the military who claimed to have some pretty incredible information. And the one that springs to mind right now is the John Callahan. I guess he's not really from the military, but his testimony of the radar evidence. So I watched that disclosure press conference, and it kind of shocked me. Because again, I'd only seen a couple of documentaries, about UFOs, and it was something that I'd not really thought about up to that point in my life, and I was 27 in 2007. So after watching the press conference, it took me back to 1998, because my mother unfortunately passed away quite suddenly in 1998. But a couple of weeks before she passed away, I was standing in the kitchen with her and a good friend of hers and mine. And I can't remember how it came up in conversation, but she said that she had seen a flying saucer in broad daylight when she was younger. And obviously my memory of it is relatively vague, because soon after she passed away, and then it just completely, I just never thought any more about that story. But from what I remember her telling me, she said that she was standing in her father's bedroom, or maybe his study, looking out of the window, and it was in broad daylight, and she saw a flying saucer come down out of the sky, land in the park behind her house, which would have been at the end of a garden behind a fence, And she said that, and the crazy part was that it just carried on going into the ground as if the ground wasn't even there. And so now fast forward back to 2007, I've watched the disclosure press conference. It's shocked me, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, my mum told me about that she had a broad daylight sighting of a flying saucer. I was 18 at the time she told me that, so she wasn't like it wasn't like a bedtime story. This wasn't something to try to spur my imagination on or encourage me to be creative or something like that. It was just a matter of fact story that she told me. So in the aftermath of watching this disclosure press conference, I found myself become just fascinated with the subject, because I thought, well, it sounds like there could really be something to this. It sounds like even if some of these witnesses I later learn are not who they say they are, or they were mistaken, it seems like some of the witnesses are very compelling. So I ended up just finding myself immersed in the subject, doing as much research as I could to find out really what was going on. So that was my introduction in let's say early 2007. And then in late 2007, I had a UFO sighting, which at the time it happened, it seemed really...
Before you go deeper into that experience, do you think that your sudden immersion in the topic and really contemplating it, doing the research, and even reflecting upon the sighting your mother conveyed to you, I think you said in 1998, do you think there's a connection between your mental immersion in the topic and your subsequent sighting? Because it seems like quite the coincidence that in early 2007, you would get interested in the topic, and then not too later after that, you would have your first sighting. Now, of course, the skeptic would say you had your first sighting because you were thinking about UFOs and you saw something you couldn't completely explain. And so you filled in the blanks with, oh, that's a UFO, when maybe it was, quote unquote, more likely a 747 or something of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, believe me, I can appreciate that perspective and that assumption being made as much as anyone, because at the time that the first sighting happened in 2007, I just couldn't believe it. I thought, this is too good to be true, that I would get so immersed in the subject and then have a sighting within 9 months, or around that. So I did, in the aftermath of that first sighting, I thought, this is just stupid. This is really stupid. But the nature of the sighting was such that it was quite unambiguous, and I could quite easily rule out it being a 747. So it's like it's such a difficult thing to deal with because I'm quite I can be quite skeptical myself. I like exercising those muscles. I like looking at hoaxes and learning about how they were made. I'm interested in photography and have been since a very early age. So I found it pretty easy within a couple of years of getting immersed in ufology to start to see the value of what a lot of skeptics bring to the subject, because a lot of it is misidentifications. A lot of it is hoaxes. There is so much of that in this subject. So yeah, in the aftermath of that first sighting, I kind of said to myself, this is too good to be true. So I kind of don't believe it, because I find it difficult. I found it difficult to believe that this would happen to me so soon. And I did do a lot of soul searching and was like, could I have just been so desperate to see something for myself that I kind of somehow hallucinated this, or was in some kind of delusional state where I was so desperate for it to happen that it was a 747, and I made it in my head look like actually it was two black triangles floating side by side.
You go into that. Yeah. Go into because like you said it was ambiguous. And by the way, I want my audience to know that believe it or not, Finn Handley, he's a debunker. He is a trained he's a trained debunker. He's been studying photography. He's actually he's a first-class magician. A lot of people don't know that. Card tricks and the whole nine, and he's used that craft to help him understand illusions. And so, I follow Finn on Twitter, and he debunks a lot of stuff, and he actually makes a lot of the UFO community, if you want to call it that community, upset at times. And it just goes to underscore like the nuance of ufology, if you will, in that it's not black and white, it's not cut and dry. There's a lot of truths that emerge simultaneously. There are people who are prone to fantasy, who are prone to believing things without a requisite amount of substantiation to believe them. But there's also people like Finn, who, from my assessment, is very level-headed, very skeptical. But it's like, here's the deal: if you're level-headed and you're skeptical, and you see an unambiguous UFO, what are you supposed to do? Say it was something that it wasn't? But I've gone too far. I'll let Finn, elaborate on that. But Finn, just yes, you had your sightings, your first sighting, and you said it was unambiguous, and it was so soon after you got immersed in this topic and started taking it seriously for the first time in your life. So just go into the details of that initial sighting. What did it encompass, and what about it made you come to the assessment that it was so unambiguous and not a misidentification?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, eventually I will animate it. I've got quite a way through the process of animating the sightings that I had. So then people will be able to watch my animation and see what I'm talking about here, because what I'm about to describe is what I've recreated quite accurately in my animations. So I think mine is a case a bit like some of the others that I've animated, where either what I describe is what happened, or I was suffering from some sort of quite intense delusional state that caused me to have hallucinations. And personally, I don't buy that argument, because I have no kind of history of that kind of thing. But I can certainly try to look at it from the skeptic's angle and think like, well, because if I'm going to just assume that UFOs aren't real, then Finn must be one of these people that was hallucinating or something along those lines. Because so I'll just go ahead and tell you what happened. I was driving towards my sister's house, coming down a road, and this road is a couple of 100 meters long, and I was about to turn right to basically do a little circle and come into the car park that's right outside the front of my sister's house. So just as I'm coming down this road, I saw two balls of light dropping out of the sky about 300 meters away. And it was two, for want of a better term, it was two orbs, so two spheres of amber-colored light, and they were corkscrewing around each other as they came down out of the sky, like two dolphins playing. So corkscrewing around each other as they dropped out of the sky in front of me. And so I thought, I'm right next to my sister's car park. I'll pull into the car park, and then I'll see if I can get a better look at what's going on. But in the process of pulling into the car park, I had to come very close to some houses, which meant that I lost sight of these two balls of light behind the rooftops of the houses that were nearby. So I then got out of the car, glanced in the general direction of where I'd lost sight of these orbs, and within a few seconds, no more than 3 or 4 seconds, these two black triangular shaped aircraft, and they were equilateral in size. I've sent you the graphics. I don't know if you can kind of share those while I'm talking about it.
I will.
But and they came directly over the top of my sister's house, and I was in a car park 10 meters or so away from my sister's house. So not directly above my head, but pretty close to going directly over my head, and relatively low. And I described it on the night that I got home and wrote it down, is that they were the height of Big Ben, which is the clock tower in London. And I'd been to London a few times as a kid, so I know what it's like to look up at a building that's quite tall, but they were nowhere near approaching being as high as any aircraft that I've ever seen fly over the town where I live. And it is in a, I guess you call it an air corridor or flight corridor, where you regularly see commercial aircraft flying over my town, and they're really high up. These two triangles were about the height of a tall building up in the air, and they were equilateral triangles. They seemed to be only a couple of meters apart, and they were in a staggered formation. So one was slightly behind of and to the left of the other. And they had a white light on each point, and they had a flashing white light in the center. And every time the light strobed, I could faintly see a kind of geometrical pattern on the underside of these triangles. And they were going at jogging pace. So it took 10 or more seconds for them to pass overhead as I'm watching them go overhead. And they carried on, heading in the direction, actually, of the centre of the town where I live, which is quite a small town called Monmouth in South Wales. And in the months preceding this, of course, I had become really immersed in the subject, and I had confided in my sister and told her, I think this UFO subject is real. And I remember asking her if she remembered our mum ever telling her this story about her sighting. And I don't think my sister could recall that. And my sister wasn't with us when my mum told me about it. So I'm not sure if my mum even told my sister about it. I found it strange that my mum only told me about it when I was 18. I was like, wow, why didn't you tell me that sooner? That's an amazing story. And I think part of it is that my mum wasn't interested in the subject. This was not something that my mum was a hard worker who worked as a secretary. She was working, I think, as a personal assistant to a manager of a company at the time that she passed. She was not into conspiracy theories at all. It had never even entered my kind of consciousness, this idea of conspiracy theories, except perhaps maybe the JFK conspiracy theory, because I watched the movie when I was younger and I thought that was great, but I wasn't interested in conspiracy theories. Neither was my mum. So I remember after seeing these triangles, I thought, I've just been talking to my sister the last couple of months about UFOs, and I'm about to walk into her house and tell her, I think I've seen 2 UFOs flying over her house, and she's not going to believe me. But I told her anyway. I didn't tell her about the orbs. I had already kind of repressed the orb part of the sighting, because that was even more bizarre than seeing 2 triangles. But at least with 2 triangles, I could say, hey, I think I've seen 2 UFOs, but maybe it was just some aircraft and I'm not familiar with that type of aircraft. But deep down, I knew there are no aircraft that are like that move in close formation, that are silent, by the way. As they went directly overhead, there was no noise. And the only other aircraft I'm aware of that fly in such close formation are a group in the UK that we call the Red Arrows. And I think you've got an equivalent in America where they turn up at air shows and they do formation flying, where they all fly in some really cool formations, and they're almost wingtip to wingtip, so like a meter apart, sometimes maybe even less than that. And these 2 triangles it seemed like they were a couple of meters apart. So yeah, that's the first sighting I had, late 2007.
So, you've shared some of this story with me before. I want to ask you about some specifics of your first sighting, and we'll progress to your 2 other sightings that you had. But you spoke about the orbs, and you spoke about the geometric pattern you saw underneath the craft. Could you get into more specific details? Because I think you've mentioned to me that when you saw the orbs, it was like maybe like fire, like not perfectly spherical, but it was more textured than that. Go into any of the details you can about the nuances of the actual sighting and the specificities of the structure. I don't know if this applies to your first sighting and also your subsequent sightings are only your subsequent sightings, but if whatever applies to your first sighting in terms of like the intricacies of the craft or the real minute details that stood out to you when you witnessed these craft.
Okay, so yeah, the first sighting, I was so far from the orbs when I saw them dropping out of the sky that I didn't get any feeling for the details, for any details. They just looked like two globes or spheres of amber-colored light. They were clearly, internally lit. But no, it was the final sighting where I got really close to the orbs that I actually saw more of the texture and the kind of they seemed to be kind of fizzing with energy around the edges, but I wasn't close enough for the first sighting to get that impression. But I would just add that as the triangles went overhead, the lights that were on each point were it was like they were on the tip, a bit like the head of a matchstick. Like they were on each tip. They weren't like many people describe as being these big round lights on the underside. It was like they were on the tip of each point of the triangle, and they were they appeared to be quite small. Like they reminded me of LED lights, like Christmas light on a Christmas tree, that kind of thing. And the white light that was strobing in the middle. I think that. I mean, I can completely understand why skeptics would say, well, why would UFOs have strobing lights on them? So surely that must be something that suggests that they were just normal aircraft. And I would say, yeah, everything except the fact that they were equilateral triangles and they were silent and they were so low and they were so close together. But the strobing thing is an interesting feature, and I can't answer why UFOs have lights on them. My gut tells me it's because they want to be seen. Or why would they fly so low as well? But it did kind of enabled me in the immediate aftermath to think maybe these couldn't have been UFOs, right? They couldn't be, because I had only just kind of months earlier become almost obsessed with the subject. So why would it happen to me? There are plenty of people who've been obsessed with the subject for years. There are authors, people like Richard Dolan have written books and have been interested in this for decades, and they don't get to see one. And I remember thinking, once I became really immersed in the subject, I'd love to see one, but I've got the rest of my life to see it. I'm not expecting it to happen in the next few months or the next couple of years. And maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get to see one by chance later on in life. But I think from what I've learned since, and some of the other witnesses I've spoken to and worked with on these animations, it seems like some people are kind of picked out for this, and it seems like I went through a flap, what Mick West and a lot of other people would call a flap, because these three sightings happened between 2007 and 2008, and there's been nothing since. But I've been just as immersed and interested in the subject ever since. So why none since? It's a fascinating question. I'd love to have more sightings. Part of me would kind of love to. Part of me wouldn't. Part of me would think it might drive me mad, because I'd be like, why, why me? Why do I keep getting to see these things? So, in some senses, I'm glad that it just happened for that limited period of my life. So I got to experience personally that these things are real, but then it doesn't keep happening. I'm actually kind of grateful for that, because it's very confusing.
Okay. How about progress into your second and third sighting? You said you had, I don't know, you got interested in early 2007. Then you had your next sighting, which was either mid or late 2007. And then no, I'm sorry. You got interested in 2007 early. Then you had your next sighting. And then you had two more sightings after that. Maybe you could help me with the timeline a little bit. And now I want you to go into the specificities of the second and third sighting. You go through what you were doing, how it emerged, and maybe even how it's different, how it was distinct from your initial sighting.
Sure. So, yeah. So the first sighting happened at the end. I think it was December 2007. I've got the date somewhere, and I will go into more detail on that when I make the animations, or when I finish the animations. But so that was 2007, end of 2007. I was living just outside of the town where I now live, and then in 2008, in June or July, I moved into the town where I now live and became a taxi driver. And I would bring it up with my taxi colleagues every now and again. My boss was a bit more into the ridicule side of it, but his partner in the business was quite interested in it, and one of my other colleagues was quite interested, and I got the impression that they believed me. So I would talk to them about it every now and again. And then in September of 2008, it's September the 26th at about 10 p.m. because I was a night worker, so I would start work at about 3 p.m. and carry on till about midnight. And about 10 p.m., my boss sent me to pick up a customer from a pub and take him to a village just outside of Monmouth where I live. So I picked him up, and we're heading up the motorway, and it involves going up this hill, and then we're coming down the other side of this hill on a dual carriageway, which is 2 lanes on either side. And as we're coming down the hill, I saw these 2 black triangles again, but this time they had 4 turquoise blue lights along the back end of each one. But just like previously, they were in very close formation, and they were traveling towards me and heading over the roof of the car. They seemed a little higher than they were the first time. And I actually, my adrenaline started to spike, and I actually got kind of angry because I couldn't believe this was happening again. I couldn't believe I was seeing these triangles again. And I said to the customer, "Can you see that?" As I looked up through the windscreen, I was kind of looking up through the windscreen at them as they passed overhead. And so he leant forward and looked up. I said, "Can you see that?" And he said, "Yeah, I can see that." And I instinctively wanted to pull the car over so that I could watch them as they carried on, because they were going overhead. So I thought, well, I won't be able to kind of follow them in the mirror because they're too high up, and I won't be able to look over my shoulder and follow them for very long because I'm meant to be driving this guy home. So I pulled over in the first lay-by, and there was one pretty close. So I pulled over in that within maybe 5 or 10 seconds of seeing them, because as we're coming down this hill, there is a lay-by on the left-hand side. So I pulled into the lay-by and I got out of the car and I watched them carrying on, heading in the opposite direction to where I was heading. And they headed over the hill, and I lost sight of them. And I got back in the car, and I said to the customer, "I can't believe this. This is the second time I've seen those things." And I was actually angry because it just was ridiculous. It was ridiculous that I'd now seen these things twice in what felt like quite a short space of time, within. So that was September. So that was probably, 9 or 10 or 9 months after seeing the first ones. It just felt like it was way too good to be true that I kept getting to see these black triangles when they were obviously black triangles. They weren't normal aircraft. They were too low. They were in formation. They had a row of 4 turquoise blue lights along the back end that were not like Christmas lights. These turquoise blue lights were big, oblong shaped, and unlike any light I've ever seen on an aircraft. I've never been to an air show, but I've been to a museum in the UK where you get pretty close to aircraft. I've been to airports. I've been abroad several times. I had at that point, and I've been to an outdoor. I'm not sure what you'd call it. I think I must have been 15 or 16, but an outdoor place where they kept different aircraft, and you could go into a hangar and you could look at certain aircraft, and then you could go outside and look at other aircraft. So I'm aware of what the average aircraft looks like, and I've seen them flying over the town where I live my entire life. Obviously, I did start looking up more into the sky in the period after becoming interested in UFOs. And for the first few months of of really getting immersed in UFOs, I was looking up a lot. And also while I was taxi driving, I was looking up a lot, and I wanted something to happen. And I wanted something to happen again. After the first sighting in 2007, I was not a taxi driver. But by 2008, once I'd become a taxi driver, I was still looking up quite a bit. And I was seeing plenty of normal aircraft, and I was seeing plenty of stars in the distance and Chinese lanterns and that sort of thing. But this is September the 26th, 2008, just gone 10 o'clock, and they're flying over the car, and I just can't believe it's happened again. So I had to drop that guy off about a mile further on from where I'd seen these triangles. And by the way, after I got back in the car with him and I started to drive on, I said to him, I can't believe this is the second time I've seen those things. And he said, and I'm not quoting him exactly, but he said, I've never seen aircraft like that, and I used to be in the military. Now, I wish when I dropped him off, I'd said to him something like, hey, can I get your phone number so we can get in touch in the future, and I can prove to other people that I wasn't alone for this sighting, because it would be great to have you, maybe if I could get you on camera or something. I was not thinking that at the time. It's great hindsight to have, but at the time I'd picked him up from a pub. He'd had a few to drink. I remember he had a walking stick. I think he had an injury from being in the military. Because I think he must have been in his early 50s, maybe late 40s. But anyway, I dropped him off. I turned the car around, and my next pickup was to pick some people up on the way back into town. So I remember texting a friend of mine before I headed towards picking these people up, and texted him saying that I've just seen these triangles again. And I thought that was it. I thought, wow, I've got to see them twice, and that's ridiculous. That's crazy, but I have seen them twice. So I went to pick these other people up, and after about 10 or 15 minutes, my boss phoned me on my mobile phone, and he said, those people have cancelled their taxi. They don't want it anymore. So I started to head back into town to pick up my next customer, and he was a regular customer who we picked up nearly, I think, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week, at 10:30. To take him, he'd go for a couple of drinks at the pub before the pubs closed at 11 o'clock. So I was on my way to pick him up. So I know it was about 20 past 10. And I was coming back into town now. I'd gone back over the hill. I'd come over, and I'm heading down the dual carriageway. And we used to have these old school radios in the taxi. And once I was back in radio range, I used the radio to say to the underboss, who was the one who didn't ridicule me about the subject. I said to him, UFOs are in Monmouth again. And I just meant it as a bit of a laugh. I didn't think, there'd be much to make of it, because, I would be telling him about what had just happened to me once I got a chance to, but I'm just talking over the radio for a bit of fun. And then I came up to the traffic lights in the center or parallel to the center of town. And I stopped at the traffic lights, and as I stopped at these traffic lights, which were red, I noticed that there were what looked like two balls of light hovering above the park, which is called Chippenham Park, and it's just to the right-hand side of the dual carriageway as you're driving down after these traffic lights. And I could see these two balls of light hovering above the trees, just set back from the road a little. And my adrenaline went through the roof. I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And now I was not expecting to have yet another sighting, so this would be the second sighting on the same night, on September the 26th. So the lights turned green, and I instinctively wound my window down. I can't remember whether it was an electric window or a hand wound one, but I wound the window down, and I started to drive past these balls of light. And I know exactly what tree they were hovering above, because I know this town. I've lived here my whole life. I've driven that section of road. I would drive it 5 or more times a day as a taxi driver. And they were hovering above the tallest 2 trees in a row of trees in the park called Chippenham Park. And they were about 5, maybe 7 or 8 meters above the tops of the trees. And it was 2 balls, one above the other. And the lower one was smaller than the top one. So it's like this. I think they were just a couple of meters apart, but the lower one had a spike extending out of its right-hand side. And I'm driving past them, looking out of my window, looking up at them, and I'm essentially triangulating them as I drove past them, because they started in front of me above these trees. And as I drove past them, they stayed above the same tree. So I'm triangulating them. I know exactly what tree they were above. I've had people tell me, well, how do you know it wasn't the North Star? And I'm like, well, because the North Star would have stayed over there. It wouldn't have hovered above the trees. And this spike that was extending out of the lower, smaller orb was getting longer, and it was kind of shaking as it came out. It was like both orbs were, if you ever watched the documentary about space, and sometimes they show you just a close-up of the sun, and it's sped up, so you can see all of this movement of the you know, whatever it's made out of, this undulating movement. It was like that. They were like mini suns, but they were moving very fast, and the edges of them had what looked like a kind of fizzing kind of nature to it. They actually reminded me a little bit of the things that you hold as a kid at a fireworks party called sparklers. I don't know if that's what they're called in America, but in the UK, I'd really look forward to getting hold of a sparkler on fireworks night. And we were always warned to never touch the bit of it that gets hot, but hold it from the bottom, and you can wave it around, and at night it'll leave this trail behind it. And it's actually not leaving a trail behind it. It's kind of burning your retina and leaving a trail on your retina, so you can kind of draw your name in the sky in front of you. And the impression I got from these orbs was that they didn't actually have sparks jumping off them, but it was like a contained kind of spark to the edges of them. So the impression I got from them was that they were extremely energetic, and my instinctive reaction was to keep driving and get some distance away from them. And this spike that was extending out of the lower one was particularly disturbing. I didn't want to hang around to see how long that spike got. I got this strong impression that actually they might explode. That was what I was thinking. I was thinking that with the energy that they seemed to be containing, I didn't know what was going to happen next. So I thought, I'll carry on driving down the road, and I'll pull over in a slip road, which I knew was coming up. So I did that, and I've worked out how long it took. That took about 15 seconds. And so I watched them over my shoulder, and then I put my eyes back on the road, and I'm thinking, right, I want to pull over as quickly as I can. So I sped up a little. By the way, when I'm driving past them, I was going very slowly, maybe 5 miles an hour, because I really wanted to get a good look at them as I was watching them go past. They were not moving. It was like they were on a rod, because they just didn't move at all. They were right above this particular treetop. So for about 10 to 15 seconds, I took my eyes off them while I concentrated on pulling the car over. And I thought, when I get out, I'll be able to look back and watch what was happening. So I pulled the car over, I got out, and I turned back to look at them. And they weren't there anymore. Instead, there were two large black triangular aircraft. And they weren't... There's a problem with language. That the UFO, when someone's seen a UFO, they say, yeah, I saw UFOs. I didn't see two UFOs. I saw two black triangular aircraft hovering above the trees by the side of the road. I identified what they were. I just can't identify who made them. But everything about them was completely identifiable. They were between 250 and 300 meters away from me. And they were right next to each other. So again, in formation. So instead of the balls of light, which were one above the other, you've now got two black triangles, and each one was about the size of a jet aircraft. So not as big as a commercial aircraft, not as small as a car, bigger than a truck. They were about the size of a jet aircraft. And I couldn't believe it. So I just stood in the road watching them. And after a few seconds of standing still, they started to move across the road in front of me at walking pace. And they had these four huge, very distinct, oblong-shaped, turquoise-colored lights lining the back end, and hopefully you'll be able to show the pictures that I've made in Blender of these things, because those pictures are as close as I could get to having you look through my eyes. They had a bunch of other navigation style lights on the underside, and by navigation style I mean there were some green ones, I think a red one in the middle. I'd have to look back at my Blender reconstruction, to be honest, because that's an approximation of the lights that were on the underside. There were several lights on the underside arranged in a symmetrical pattern. So if there was a green one on one side, there'd be a green one on the opposite side. Again, they had white lights on each point, not on the underside. The white lights were on each point. And they moved across the road in front of me at walking pace. As they got halfway across the motorway, they started to ripple, and they were partially transparent. So I could still tell that they were there. They didn't become invisible. They just rippled and were transparent. And that lasted for about half a second. Then they became solid again, and they carried on to the other side of the road. And then they both turned their rear end to me and headed up the road away from me. One of them carried on straight up the road away from me. It may have picked up a little bit of speed, but not much. They just certainly didn't zoom off like some people describe. And the other one eventually did a right-hand turn and followed the bridge over the river. And one more thing, all of the lights on the underside of them were slowly pulsing, getting brighter and then dimmer, and brighter and then dimmer, at about the rate of someone breathing at a normal kind of rate of breathing. And also, as they headed up the road away from me, all of those different colored lights changed to white, like someone turning a dimmer switch, except the dimmer switch is turning all of the different colors from green, blue, and whatever other colors, I think maybe even yellow, red. They all changed to white at the same time as both of these triangles flew away from me. And the interesting thing about the way they flew was that they came across the road like this, and then they just pivoted and headed away. They didn't bank. There was no banking at all. They pivoted like they were on rails, like a train on rails, and they just went exactly where they wanted to go, complete control. And that was the final sighting. And it was, that's all I needed. I don't really need another sighting after that. I feel spoilt to have had 3 sightings, but the final one kind of put the others to shame, because I think part of it was because I was kind of ready at that point to just take it in. Whereas that first sighting I explained that happened over to my sister's house, I was in disbelief while it was happening. I was still in disbelief for this final one, but not as much. So I was able to just take it in. And by the end of it, I was blown away, but I was quite excited. And I remember in the following weeks just being excited to have been able to see such an incredible thing, because they were like, who did I see? It was James Fox recently talking about a witness, and that witness said, "Have you ever seen a brand new Corvette? It was better than that." It was like seeing just the coolest type of craft or car or something like that. Just that they were so sleek and simplistic, but obviously of an incredibly high technology. So I just felt really lucky in the aftermath. And then since then, I've just kind of become more and more confused by the whole thing. Why me? Why did it happen 3 times? Who's going to believe me after I have 1 sighting? When I tell them 3 sightings, well, they're even less likely to believe me. So it's very frustrating, but at the same time, I do think I'm quite lucky, and I'm kind of grateful that I had that experience.
There's a component of your experience that you did not share, and I'm going to try to elicit it from you. Obviously, you can't definitively clarify what it was, whether it was a coincidence or a larger aspect of the phenomena that you encountered. But it's something that happened to you that is part of the literature. And it reminds me of when you were telling me, when you told your sister about your first sighting, you didn't tell her about the spheres. You repressed that part, I guess, because you were self-conscious. And this is not so uncommon. When people have unambiguous sightings, sometimes they'll hold stuff back because they don't want to be judged for it or be perceived as crazy. So they kind of whitewash it, if you will. But I recollect you sharing with me that something happened when you got home from the third sighting that seemed not only anomalous, but you learned subsequently after that what happened to you is not uncommon with testimony from various people all over the world that purport to have encountered essentially UAP. But of course, for your sighting, that was no UAP. That was no unidentified aerial phenomena. That was an identified craft that was utterly unambiguous. But go into what I'm trying to elicit from you, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. So I had a girlfriend at the time, and unfortunately, I didn't make note of this when it happened because I wasn't aware of the potential significance of it. But I think it was about a week or 2 weeks after that final sighting. I would finish at about midnight. I'd go and pick her up from where she lived, and she'd come and stay with me. And so we were walking in through the front door, and a couple of seconds after walking in through the front door, my television turned itself on. And this was a television that I was not using at the time. It's still downstairs, but it's not even plugged in now. And I was like, that's weird. And I turned it off. And then another week or perhaps 2 weeks after that, the same thing happened again. As we walked in through the front door, within a couple of seconds, the television turned itself on. Now, this wasn't something like, oh, maybe you left the TV on before you went to work, and when you came in, it was already on. No, the room is pitch black. I come into the house, and the TV turns itself on. And that second time, I was like, okay, that's weird. But I didn't think, whoa, poltergeist. I didn't think that at all. And I certainly didn't think it had anything to do with the Black Triangle encounters. But then in the following month or two, maybe 3 months afterwards, someone phoned me. It was a UFO researcher. I think it was John Hansen, because he's got quite a distinct voice, and I've seen him in several interviews since. And I remember thinking during one of those interviews, I think that's the guy that phoned me. And it would make sense that he's the guy that phoned me, because he is the author of a series of books that you can see over my right shoulder. You can see them, all of these ones here, called Haunted Skies. And he collects UFO reports primarily from the United Kingdom. And so about a week after that final sighting, I decided to report it to the local newspapers. For a while, I was thinking, I won't bother reporting it because no one's going to believe me. So what's the point? And after a while, I thought I should report it because it'll get it down on the historical record in a way so that other researchers might be interested. And it turns out that's exactly what happened. He must have got hold of a newspaper clipping from a newspaper clipping service, or maybe a friend of his got in contact with him. But he rang me up and he just said, have you got 5 minutes? Can you take 5 or 10 minutes for me to ask you a few questions about your triangle sighting that you've just reported to the newspapers? So I pulled my taxi over, or I think I was already sitting outside a pub in my taxi, and I had nothing to do for a while. So I said, yeah, go ahead. And he asked me a series of questions. And that was along the lines of, did you have any feelings of any kind of psychic powers in the aftermath? I said, no. And he said, did you ever have any like miraculous healings? Was there anything wrong with you? And did you get healed of it afterwards? And I said, no. And he said, what about poltergeist experiences? Did you have any electrical disturbances in your house in the lead up or in the aftermath to your sightings? And I said, Well, it's funny actually now you say that, because yeah, my TV turned itself on twice in the weeks following. And he said that's incredibly common, especially with people who get very close to black triangles. And that was the first I'd ever heard of what I think you now call the hitchhiker phenomenon. I don't know whether that's what it was. I don't know whether it was just a coincidence, and for some reason my TV decided to glitch out, and only then, twice in the aftermath of me getting very close to two black triangles. But I think it's an important data point, and I think it's probably something that a lot of people, just like me, don't realize. They might have something like that happen afterwards, and they don't realize it may be of some significance, so they don't write it down, or they don't even remember it happening. But yeah, that definitely happened, and it was interesting.
Yeah. So the other thing I want to ask you, Finn, is you mentioned newspaper clippings. So I want you to go into that. I think it was only because, like, as you described, your second and third sighting happened in the same day. But as I understand it, it was actually a mass sighting. There were, you can go into how many people saw it and what newspaper it actually got written up in.
Yeah, let me just quickly bring those up so that I can get it in the right order. Okay, so yeah, I've got the relevant articles up now in front of me. October the 10th. So the last sighting happened Friday the 26th of September 2008. And about a week later, I contacted a local newspaper, and it was called the Forest of Dean Review. And I think I phoned them, and I spoke to a lady, and I told her about my sightings, and she said, our editor is really into these kind of things, so I'll get him to ring you back. So I went and sat in a pub and bought a steak and chips lunch. And he phoned me back, and he said he was really interested, and could I write an email to him with all of the details, and then, even better, do a drawing of what I'd seen. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to be able to do a very good drawing, but I'll do my best. And that's this first article here, and it's number 5 in the list I've sent you. It's the Forest Review UFO article, October the 10th. It was published. Now you can see even there, I'm kind of censoring what happened. I called them 2 lights that were hovering above the trees by the road, but I knew that they were 2 orbs, and I didn't want to use the word orbs because I thought it doesn't help my story. It doesn't sound good. It sounds like someone who's into UFOs, and it's like, well, I was into UFOs, and I'm not going to admit that either in this article. And I think this happens with a lot of UFO witnesses. I think a lot of the wider story and the wider context of their sighting, they edit it out themselves because they just want people to believe what happened in front of their eyes. And they're aware, as I am, that talking about what happened beforehand, the fact that you got really interested in UFOs, and I'm not saying this happened to everyone, that people like Dave Fravor, I don't think he was interested in UFOs at all before he had his encounters. So, but I think this is the case with some witnesses, that they are really into the subject, and then they have these sightings, and they're like, oh God, that doesn't help my credibility to tell people about my sighting, but also admit that I was really into UFOs at the time. But I'm old enough now that I'm quite happy to just tell it as it is. But in this article, I described what happened. I say that the triangles were about 2.5 lampposts high. They were actually a bit lower than that, but I was being conservative. I was purposely, I'm like, I'd rather under-exaggerate than over-exaggerate. So that's the first article, and you can possibly bring it up if you like. People can read it. And I thought, that's great. I've got it down on the record. And my drawing is terrible, but it gives people a rough idea. The drawing, really, it makes the triangle that's further away look like it's much smaller than the other one. But I was just trying to draw them from an angle underneath. I had no drawing skills, so I knew the basics of having a vanishing point, which is why the road has it does seem to be going off into the distance, but then trying to apply a drawing of two triangles on top of that was really difficult, so it looks terrible. And you can see me stood on the slip road there, and in the actual bigger image itself, I've drawn a little stick man with his eyes popping out. And so that was reported on the 10th of October. And I thought that was it. I thought, I've got it out there, and people can make of it what they will. And I at the time was thinking, and I don't know why I was thinking this, but I just assumed I was the only person that saw them. But then the next week, so October the 17th, exactly a week later, because this was a weekly newspaper, I was dropping a lady off in the taxi, dropping her off at her house, and I had to help her get her shopping from out of the boot of the car, and I was walking it in through her front door. She went in ahead of me, opened the door, and went in ahead of me with one of the bags, and I followed her in with a couple of the other bags. And I almost stepped on this newspaper that was on the floor that had been posted through a letterbox, and it was staring at me in the face. It said, "UFO spotter is not alone," and it had this picture from the original article that I'd drawn. And I was really excited. I thought, okay, what's this about then? And you can see what it says here. I won't read the whole thing out, but there's an interesting part in this. It says, a Whitchurch woman, and Whitchurch is the place that I was heading to drop off my customer with the walking stick on the September the 26th. So this is just a couple of miles, or a few miles out of Monmouth. A Whitchurch woman said she and her husband saw the craft crossing the A40 in much the same way as the recent report, only in this instance it was in June of 1994. And in quotes, she says, "My son rang to tell me he was going to read out your report and it would make the hair on the back of my neck stand up," she said. "What the two of us saw that night was almost identical. There were two close together, and they flew over Weir End House very slowly and without a sound. My husband has always been cross. I did not stop, but I was petrified. I have never driven so fast in my life." Now, a lovely coincidence happened about 9 months ago. A friend of mine who lives on a hill that overlooks Whitchurch, I was talking to him about my interest in UFOs, and he said, I was talking to this lady, Connie, who lives on the Doward, where my friend lives, basically one of his neighbours. And she said she had a sighting years ago, some triangles. And I said, hang on a minute. It wasn't in 1994, was it? And he said, I can't remember, but it was something like that. And I said, can you ask her? Can you ask her if she reported it to the newspapers in 2008 after reading about my sighting? And he got back in touch with me and said, yeah, it's the same woman. So I went over with him and sat in her garden with her about 6 to 9 months ago and spoke to her about it. And she said it was absolutely incredible. And it was as she describes here. And she was leaning out the window looking up at this thing, and it had lots of lights on the underside of it, white lights on the underside of it. And she said she was absolutely terrified. Her husband has since passed away, so unfortunately I couldn't talk to him about it. But I may get together with her again in the future and recreate it and do it as one of my animations. So that was October the 17th. And then on October the 24th, so another week later, some more people had written in. And I've underlined it in red. And this is 7A, picture 7A that I sent you, the Forest Review article, October the 24th. And the journalist writes, among the latest reports is one from Mrs. Pat Trahan, who said she also saw the craft on the night of the first report. That's my report, September the 26th. But earlier in the evening and near Wysham. Wysham is where I'm sitting now. It's a housing estate, which is just over the bridge from where I saw these black triangles hovering above the trees. She says she did not fear ridicule and was not worried about putting her name to the claim. Unlike other spotters, she thought she could hear a deep, low droning as the craft passed over her. So that was October the 24th. In the same newspaper, but in the letters to the editor section on October the 24th, a gentleman wrote in, and he says, I'm writing to you in response to your article in last week's review from October the 10th, entitled The Truth Is Out There, regarding an alleged UFO sighting over Monmouth on the evening of Friday, September the 26th. I know the person who wrote it asked for anonymity for fear of ridicule, but if you know his name, or I can get in contact with him through your paper, I would very much like to do so. As you see, I saw exactly the same thing over Wisham, above Monmouth, on the same evening. The only difference being what I saw, I believe, was earlier in the evening, and the direction was slightly different. But his description, and he means my description, of the two craft, the lights, everything was eerily the same. I have seen hundreds of planes over the years, and I've seen a few things I could not explain flying overhead. And I pretty much know the flight paths above the skies at Wisham. But on the night in question, these two objects came from a northerly direction just below the Kimmin, and the Kimmin is a hill which overlooks the housing estate of Wisham that I'm in and that this gentleman lives in. And he continues, on the night in question, these two objects came from a northerly direction just below the Kimmin, flew over my house and turned slightly to the left, and in brackets he says my right, and headed towards Penalt. The thing that really puzzled me when I first caught sight of them was that I thought how strange it was that two aircraft were flying that low in formation, one behind the other, as described in the article, and all lit up underneath. But the really bizarre thing that occurred to me as they drew closer and eventually passed overhead, and he says actually over my house, was that they were hardly moving, traveling really slowly. It didn't seem right that something that size should have dropped out of the sky. Then I noticed as they passed, there was no sound, no jet or plane noise, nothing, just silence. As they neared my house, I called my wife outside to come and have a look, as I could not believe what I was seeing. Reluctantly, she came out, and she too was puzzled and thought it strange, but unfortunately went back inside as they passed overhead. And he finishes with, I cannot explain what I saw, but I know that it was real, totally bizarre. And so after reading that, I phoned up the newspaper and I said, yeah, could I have his phone number? I'd love to talk to him. And they gave me his phone number. He lives a few streets away from me. I phoned him up and we spoke for about 20 minutes or so. And he just described exactly what I saw. But I think he said all of the lights were white. He didn't see any blue lights on them. But apart from that, everything was identical. So that's October the 24th. Now, another week later, October the 31st, and this is number 8 in the series that I sent you, and we'll skip through most of it, but someone else wrote in, hairdressing student Hope Talbot of Clearwell, and Clearwell is, I don't know how many miles, maybe 6 or 7 miles away as the crow flies. So Hope Talbot of Clearwell saw a large object traveling slowly over her home on Friday the 26th of September between 10 and 11 p.m. Roughly the same time of night as me, because I'm thinking it was about 20 past 10. And September the 26th, same day. She said, I looked out the window and there was a big thing hanging over the house. It was making a vibrating noise and was quite big and quite low. There were big blue and yellow lights, and it took about 5 minutes for it to pass our house really slowly. She said, she called her mother, Alison, to see the strange oval object, which she said was about 3 houses height off the ground and about the same size as a van. The object moved through the sky towards Newland. Hope said, no one will believe me, but we definitely saw it. Me and my mum are really into this kind of thing. I felt quite shocked to see it and also quite privileged. You only get a chance to see something like that once in a blue moon. So, yeah, so that's it of the articles. You can see there's a little bit of variation there. She said it was oval shaped and the size of a van. That's a lot smaller than what I saw. But on the same night, at around the same time, but the other witnesses basically describe almost exactly what I saw in the same town on the same night at roughly the same time. So it appears that after I saw these triangles, maybe even before, but it seems like afterwards, the one that turned right and headed over the bridge was heading towards Wysham. So I don't know whether the other one that seemed to head up the motorway away from me eventually met up with the first one, and then other people see them. It's bizarre, and I think that there was something going on that night in the town where I live, and it wasn't just me that got to witness it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Finn, if you will, because one of the biggest criticisms of a UFO sighting is, memories deteriorate and all that. So could you clarify how long after your sightings you wrote down what you saw?
Yeah, I'm quite detail-orientated person. I think that's why I'm interested in learning about hoaxes and about magical methods. I learned a lot about sleight of hand, particularly with cards, not because I'm into performing, because I'm really not. I really haven't done much performing of magic, but I love learning about it, about how it works. I've been interested in photography since age 5 because my father was a photographer and he really encouraged me. And I love the different technical stuff that goes on with the camera and the different types of cameras and that kind of thing. So just instinctively, I wrote down the details of the first sighting that happened in late 2007 within 2 hours of it happening, because I obviously went in to see my sister into her house, probably hung around there for an hour and a half. Then I went home and I brought Photoshop up on my computer, and I thought I can use Photoshop to do a rough reconstruction of this in Photoshop. And it was so I wrote down the details. And after the two sightings on the September the 26th in 2008, I would have picked my girlfriend up at around midnight. And remember, the sightings happened between 10 o'clock and 10:30. I would have picked her up at about midnight and then gone home, and I straight away made another Photoshop reconstruction and wrote at the bottom of that the details, such as the brief, gentle dimming of the lights and the way the lights changed color after they turned away from me. And I remember, as soon as I did that Photoshop reconstruction, I already by then I couldn't remember the actual pattern of the lights on the underside, because it wasn't something that I was kind of trying to memorize at the time. It was just like there was a rough pattern, symmetrical bunch of lights on the underside. But those blue turquoise lights stuck out like a sore thumb, and they were something that was very easy to remember, that particular detail. And the overall size of the triangles was easy to remember because I was so close to them. And also there's a petrol station at the bottom end of Monmouth that's still there now, and it's got a roof over the top of it, and it's a 12-pump petrol station. And I remember thinking, as I watched these triangles go across the road, they were about the size of the roof of that petrol station. Each triangle was about the size of the roof of that petrol station. So you could comfortably park about 12 cars under each of those triangles. So my story hasn't changed at all, in part thanks to, I think, the fact that I wrote down all those details on the same night that these sightings happened.
Great. So the next thing I want to ask you is about your animations. I think you've done about 15 animations so far. And your first one was on July 25th, 2022. You do it on YouTube. So if you're watching this, definitely check out Finn's YouTube channel. It will be the first link under the description box. But anyways, Finn, what inspired you? Because it's interesting that I don't think you had any training in animation. So first you get interested in the idea emerges in your mind that you want to start creating animations for people who have had sightings. Then you go to the trouble of learning how to do animations, and then you actually construct them for free. So kind of explain how that process occurred.
Yeah, so after doing that terrible drawing of the triangles for the newspaper, and also doing some equally bad attempts at doing the triangles in Photoshop. I don't know if I sent you the actual reconstructions I made in Photoshop, but after that final sighting, I drew the triangles as if I was looking up at them from underneath, because I had already worked out from just previous experience in Photoshop that I'm not good at drawing stuff. I'm not naturally gifted in that area. And although I did art A-level, I mainly focused on doing abstract art because I'm not so good at drawing real stuff. So I eventually realized if I want to do a really good reconstruction of what I saw, I need to learn a 3D package, a 3D app. So it was in 2019 that I downloaded a free app called Blender after doing a bit of homework, because I realized I wouldn't be able to afford one of the more professional paid for 3D apps. So I found out about this app called Blender, downloaded it, and then I spent, so it was probably, let's say, mid-2019, I spent 1.5 to 2 years just doing tutorials, because same with learning card tricks, basically. Once I want to learn something, and I know that we're blessed in this day and age to be able to watch tutorials on YouTube, I thought I could actually get quite good at this, but I'm not just going to do a couple of tutorials, over the course of a few weeks and then try to recreate what I saw. I'm going to do a bunch of tutorials, and then I'll be able to recreate the entire layout of the geography, not only of the first sighting, so I'll be able to rebuild my sister's house, rebuild the roads around it, and then I'll be able to do a still photograph of what I saw, but I'll actually be able to build the triangles in 3D, and I'll actually be able to put myself in the car park, and I'll be able to build everything to scale so I can really do it properly. But at that point, I was only thinking in 2019, 2020, that I would do still versions, like still images of what I'd seen. And then in 2022, in July 2022, this guy called Patrick from Germany saw one of my still recreations. I think I could probably find the Twitter thread, actually, and I might do that because I'm going to do an interview with Patrick. So we'll look up the original Twitter thread where he said to me, I think he was impressed by the still images I'd made in Blender at that point. And he said, could you animate my sighting? So I asked him about it, and it's a relatively simple sighting where, and it's the first animation on my channel, where he sees what looks like 3 stars in the distance, but they're really close together. And after looking at them for a few seconds, they shoot down out of the sky, and they are a black triangle. They shoot down out of the sky at incredibly high speed and hover above his neighbor's garage. And it's a black triangle with 3 big white lights on the underside. And it hovers there completely still. And after several seconds, it draws a triangle. It goes zip, zip, zip back to its original spot, and then shoots up into the sky, leaving a quite distinct trail behind it. And I thought, I can actually try and do that, but I'm getting on a bit. I was 42 in 2022, so I was just thinking, this is going to be a bit of a hassle to learn animation at this point in my life, but I'm going to do it because then I'll be able to animate my sightings. And I've already built the scene to scale, and I've already made the still images, so all I'll have to do is animate the car driving down the road towards the orbs, which I'd already created, and then I'll be able to animate the camera getting out of the car and looking back to see the triangles hovering above the trees. So I thought, yeah, I'll do it. And after doing his animation, I thought, this is it. I need to do this for more people. I need to get better at it, so that by the time I finish my animations, I'll have learnt a lot from doing other people's animations. Plus, I just remember thinking, this is what I should do with my life. This would be a great thing that would be very satisfying and really useful to the people like myself who have had these kind of experiences, because I would have loved for that to happen in the aftermath of my sighting, to be able to get in contact with someone and say, can you animate what I've seen? But not only just to be able to, not just some random animator, but someone who believes me and who is willing to really take the time to work with me to make sure that the flying saucer is not different, to make sure it's exactly what I describe. Because something that's
not flying saucer, triangle.
Well, no, I'm just using flying saucer as an example. If someone's seen a flying saucer, and they want to get it animated, what have been the options up until now? It's been to hope that maybe one day you get approached by someone who's making a documentary, then you tell the guy who's making the CG recreations for that documentary what happened, and then you hope to God that he actually does it accurately. And as we know from just watching some of these TV shows, and I mean, there's a TV show, I think it's called UFO Witness, and the narrator will be telling you about what happened to this person, and this person was staring up at this flying saucer, and it was hovering there silently. And then it'll switch to a clip of a CGI recreation of the flying saucer, and the flying saucer will be making a buzzing noise for dramatic purpose. And it's often struck me when I've watched these CGI recreations in documentaries and TV shows that I think sometimes they're taking too much, what's it called, dramatic license. They're adding stuff to it to make it more compelling so that you don't change the channel. But that's not what the UFO witness wants. The UFO witness, if they're anything like me, whether it's just flying saucer or a black triangle or even an orb or even a tic-tac, I think they want it to be accurately recreated. So if there's no noise, let's animate it with no noise. If it does make a humming noise, let's animate it, but try and find the correct sound effect so that we get it really close, if not like perfect, to what it actually sounded like. So the point about my animations is that because I know this has happened to other people, when I'm recreating my triangle sightings, I'm going to make sure it's as close to what actually happened as possible. I'm not going to add anything to make it more dramatic. So that's what I've been doing with these witnesses. So, for example, working with Patrick on his triangle, I asked him, how long were you looking at it in those 3 stars that were really close together before it shot out of the sky? And then when it shot out of the sky, how fast did it shoot out of the sky? And then I've sent him a video when we've got to that point that it's shot out of the sky, and I'm like, is it coming down fast enough? Is that fast enough? Or is it too slow? I've got it kind of curving a little bit as it comes down. Did it come down in a straight line? And I want the witness to correct me on all of these things and say, no, Finn, it's too fast. Or it hovered for a little bit longer before it came down. So I'm trying to get it so that we're looking through their eyes and we're basically seeing the full story as if we're looking through their eyes. So with Patrick, once it's hovering over his neighbor's garage, he said it did this movement where it went up, down, and then back to its original spot. And I said, how fast did it do that? And he verbalized it by making a noise, something like whoop, whoop, whoop. And I took that sound effect of his voice and I played it while I was animating it so that I get the timing absolutely in time with what he's trying to tell me. So there are some things, because I'm self-taught, that I'm quite limited on, and you'll see that if you watch some of my animations. There, especially with animating people, like in the animation of the 3 boys in Las Vegas who are sat by a swimming pool. The animation of their movements is is quite amateurish, but it gets the point across. But what I can animate pretty accurately is the movements of these craft that people are talking about, because it's just easier to, it's very difficult to animate human movement. So you'll have to forgive me on that front. But on the ways that the crafts are moving in my animations, I've done everything I can to get those as accurate as possible. And I do it by sending the witness multiple drafts as I'm going along and getting them to correct me until we get it as close as I can to what actually happened.
So my question for you, Finn, is I think you've created 15 animations so far of people having encounters with UFOs. What have you learned through this process? What are some of the parallels between various people's sightings that stand out to you?
Let me bring up my channel so I can just remind myself of the ones I've done, because it feels like it's been quite a long time, even though it's only been a year, well, a couple of years. It's hard because I haven't met any of these people, so I need to get to know them first before I decide whether I'm going to commit to do it, whether I believe them. I'm just as skeptical, well, probably less skeptical than I would have been before all of this, before my sightings, but I'm still quite skeptical when I hear about a case, and I have to make my own mind up like anyone else does, whether I believe these people, and then whether I'm going to spend sometimes 8 hours a night for up to a month or 2 months working on these. So I really try to get to know the person a little bit, and as much as I can through voice messages and texting. And then if it's an unambiguous sighting that I'm interested in, and I believe the person, then I will start to get details from them. I try to get them to do drawings for me if they haven't already. And I guess I haven't really learned anything kind of overarching that would. It's like I guess what I've learned is that they're like me. That these witnesses are just like me. They find it hard to believe. They often don't want to share their full name because they're worried about the ridicule. Only a few of them, I think, will want to do interviews with me. I haven't approached all of them yet because I want to work my way through them. But I wouldn't be surprised if only half of them end up actually doing interviews with me, or even less than that, because they don't want to go public. But yeah, they are just as baffled as I am about why them. Because in a lot of these animations I've done, like the first one with Patrick with his triangle, it's quite obviously looking at him, isn't it? It's not just that he happened to, it's not just that if he had been inside asleep, the same thing would have happened. It seems to have come down out of the sky and hovered over his neighbor's house, and it's pointing directly at him. So the same with the next guy, the huge orb sighting, 2017 is the name of the video, from northern Illinois. This is a young guy driving in a car. He sees a flash out of the left-hand side of his car, which lights up the landscape almost like daytime, and causes him to look out the car over his left shoulder, where he sees this orb in the distance. And within a second of seeing this orb, it has shot out of the sky and is now hovering directly above his car. And him and I think his friend are looking at this thing through the sunroof. And it's right there above the car, maybe 10 meters above the car. I can't remember what the measurements were, but we kind of estimated it between the two of us. When he told me how big it was and how far away he thought it was, I put it at that distance, and then I sent him a picture or maybe a short video, and he was like, maybe it was a little higher. And so it's following him along directly above his sunroof for a few seconds, and then it shoots off into the sky like a bullet, as if like what Fravor describes with the Tic Tac. So clearly that thing has picked him out, and it's showing itself to him. Similarly with Max McCabe, the guy who's in the 5th video I made, which is called Telepathic Golden Disc UFO 2014. Max has done a few podcasts, and I strongly recommend to people that are interested in that animation to listen to the podcast that he's done, at least one of them, because he had, a bit like me, he had a flap. He had a period in his life where he had multiple bizarre experiences that included this sighting, which I think is the most spectacular, but at least 2 other sightings, and I may recreate those with him in the future. He's a really, really wonderful guy, and I worked with him on this for over a month to get it as accurate as possible. And he's sitting in his back garden, just, I think, having a cigarette before going to bed, and he sees a flash in the sky, and he's like, "What's that?" And then there's another flash, but this flash seems like it's right overhead. The first flash could have been like over to the right, over the roof of the house. The second flash, he felt like if someone let a flash bulb off right above him. So he now looks up, and then these two orbs come from behind him, stop in front of him, pivot, and then shoot over the roof of his house to his left, leaving a trail behind them, just like Patrick, the first animation, where when the triangle shoots off, it leaves a trail behind it. So Max jumps up, runs through his house, opens the front door, looks out the front, and is trying to see where these orbs were, but there's nothing there. So he's like, what the hell? What was that all about? Decides to have a cigarette out the front, leaning up against his car. And then as he walks in through his front door, closes the front door, and he's about to walk up the stairs, he gets a few steps up, and he hears I don't know if he said he heard it or he felt it, but there's a voice that's telling him, don't close the door, go outside and look up. And I remember saying to him, but wait a minute, you did close the door, didn't you? Because I've just animated you closing the door. And he said, yeah, I did close the door, but this is what it said to me. It said, don't close the door, go outside and look up. So he goes outside, he opens the front door, he looks up, and within a few seconds, this huge craft comes out from basically the roof of his house, just above the roof of his house, and it's a big, fiery, kind of plasma-like, spinning top-shaped craft. And I've animated it as well as I could, but I think the flames that I've got kind of lapping off its surface don't perfectly recreate what he was describing. And again, my skills are limited, so I can do my best, but I don't always absolutely nail it. And he's watching this thing, and he said it was absolutely incredible. And this is why I strongly recommend you listen to the podcast so you can hear it through his words, because he goes into more detail than I could in the animation. He said he wanted to shout out to his neighbors or to his girlfriend to come and have a look at this thing, but he felt like, I think he said he felt like no one would believe him, or it just, he just needed to keep his eyes on it. Then he started to worry. He was like, I'm very close to this thing. I could get some kind of radiation burns or some kind of exposure burns to it. Then he thinks, I'll get my phone out and take a photo. And as he goes to get his phone out, it starts to move away. And he gets this intense feeling like, oh, I failed. I've failed. I wasn't meant to think, can I prove it? And now it's moving away, and he's chasing it down the road because he doesn't want it to go away. And I think he said that he was saying under his breath, don't go, because he was so amazed by the appearance of this thing and by how incredible it looked that he didn't want it to leave. And I believe him. I believe that Max had multiple bizarre encounters. And I believe he had more than one sighting, because that's what happened to me. And I know how hard it is to even believe it happened to me, let alone even my I don't know if my sister even believes me. I really don't, because it just seems crazy. And why would it happen to me? I was just a taxi driver for that final sighting. What is the point of giving certain people multiple unambiguous encounters with this phenomena where other people don't get to see it? And some of those people might be better targets for it. They might be better at spreading the word that it's real. It's like, is that the point of it? Is that what this is all about? Is it to get us to keep talking about it? If it is, not many people are listening to me. So what's the point? So it's so confusing. And I think you've just got to be open to multiple possible explanations, because to settle on one, I think some people have, and I disagree with their conclusions. So you kind of have to make your own mind up about it, but you have to not make your own mind up. You have to remain in the area of what else might this possibly mean. So in working with these witnesses, I think more than anything, it's satisfying it gives me something to do that I really enjoy doing, and I feel has meaning to it, because this is what I would want as a witness. I would want someone to come and animate my sightings for me and give me their time in a way where they're asking me for all of the details multiple times. It's like if you went to a therapist to talk to them about your UFO sighting, they wouldn't ask you as much as I do. They wouldn't ask you to repeat it again and again. Well, maybe they would, in which case they're worth the money, because I ask the witnesses that I work with about the details, and then again, and then I send them a draft, and I'm like, is that close to it? What can I change to make it even better, to make it even closer to what you were telling me? So I think it's been therapeutic for some of them. I think some of them also want to kind of move on with their life, and they're not like me. They don't want to stay on Twitter arguing with Mick West for years. They want to kind of move onwards and leave it in the rearview mirror. And once they've had an animation made of their sighting, they can do that. And I think also it makes it much easier for them also to communicate with their friends and family what happened. So in the example of the huge flying saucer UFO 2016, which is the 6th video I did, this gentleman, as he's watching a huge flying saucer heading off into the distance, and he said he was watching it for about 15 minutes as it flew off. Now, I didn't animate a flying saucer slowly flying away for 15 minutes because most people will tune out after about 60 seconds of that. So I kind of condensed time, and you see it flying off over the course of a minute or two. But he said for about 15 minutes, he did try and get photos of it. This is a really interesting case where he said, I got multiple photos. They all just came out as black and fuzzy, except for one photo, which came out and it looked like Venus. It was just a white dot in the middle of the screen and surrounded by black fuzz. But he's watching a huge flying saucer with blue lights around the outside that fades away until only the blue lights are visible and the saucer isn't visible. But he said that for most of the time, he was texting his mother saying, "Mum, I'm watching this huge flying saucer floating over the desert." So when I finished the animation, he said to me, and I'm not quoting, but he was just so grateful that he'd been able to show this to his mother and finally communicate to her more accurately exactly what it was that he was looking at. So I think for a lot of people, it's really useful, and I'm looking forward to when I finish my animations so that then I won't have to tell people what happened. I can actually show them what happened and show them accurately. Because I think when I say to people that these triangles were hovering just above the trees by the side of the road, I don't think many people can accurately imagine that without also thinking he's probably exaggerating. Maybe they were a bit higher. So when I actually have finished the animations, I can show them, no, they were just a matter of meters above the treetops.
Great. So from our conversation, and also I've watched all of your videos. In fact, to prepare for this interview, I watched them all, and I felt like I had some kind of cosmic trip by the end of it. But one thing I've gathered by talking with you and by reviewing your videos, your animations, is that this mystery is so much further beyond just unknown objects being witnessed. There's so much more to it than that, because as you've got into, it's like, why are some people seeing them and not others? Why do they have lights that seemingly are expressing themselves intentionally so that people do not miss the sighting? It's not so uncommon for people to have multiple sightings, which seems to be beyond the probability of coincidence. And then you have, another component of it. Some people receive telepathic messages, as one of your animations demonstrated, where it said, "Don't close the door, come outside." He goes outside, he looks up and he sees this bizarre, huge light, totally unambiguous. And then there's also another element that you touched on, which is potentially like a hitchhiker phenomenon or poltergeist phenomenon. 2 times after your sighting, you go into your house and the TV turns on. These are and you're very clear-headed, you're very objective. You said you don't know if it's connected to your sighting, but nevertheless, this happened after your sighting. It's never happened before your sighting, and these were the only 2 times it happened. And you only learned that this is part of the literature when some expert was interviewing you and asked you a very specific question and said, "Hey, did you have any, I don't remember exactly how you worded it, but like any poltergeist or anything weird electrically happened?" And you're like, now come to think about it, yeah. So we're dealing with a mystery that is so much further beyond just technological objects that people are seeing. And we haven't even gotten into the abduction phenomenon, but And obviously, you know, that's another layer of interaction with UFO intelligence. But I would argue that there's plenty to unpack by just people seeing stuff, because when people see stuff, like when they have these unambiguous encounters, it does appear that more is going on than they're just in the right place at the right time, and it's purely coincidental. It seems like something far beyond that's going on, and we can only speculate. Finn, this has been a great interview. I really enjoyed learning about your journey with animations, your journey with learning about the UFO topic, and then incredibly having 3 sightings in close proximity to immersing yourself in the topic. And I do believe that you will make animations probably forever. And I wish you great luck on your YouTube channel. I think it's going to grow a lot. As far as I know, out of 8 billion human beings on this planet, you are literally the only human being on this planet that makes animations for witnesses for free. That's quite something to be someone who's the only one, as far as I know, at least. Anyways, wrapping this up, please, Finn, tell people how they can find you, how they can watch your animations, and maybe follow you on Twitter or whatever other social media link you want to give out.
Thanks, Ryan. I mean, and thank you for the work that you do on this subject and for having such an open mind on it, but also a very balanced approach. I love your channel. I think it's brilliant. And you know, you make me think and you make me laugh. So I couldn't ask for more, really. My Twitter is at Finn365. My YouTube channel is at Finn365. I'd love for people to just go and watch my videos and comment underneath if they enjoy them. I do this for free because I think if I didn't, I wouldn't get to work with the types of witnesses that I have. If I said to people, okay, I'm going to do it, but it's going to take me, 2 or 3 weeks, so I'm going to need several hundred pounds, then most of them would just not be able to afford it. So it's something that I do for free, but I ask for donations at the end of each video. And I occasionally get donations, but I really haven't made much out of this. So I just want to try and grow the channel so that then eventually I can find a way to maybe monetize it a little bit and make a little bit on the side to help, for example, pay for a new computer. I desperately need a new computer so that I can speed up the whole process, because the computer I'm currently using is from 2016, and it makes things a lot slower and more painstaking. So yeah, I think that's it, really. I also invite other witnesses who've had unambiguous UFO encounters to get in touch if they'd like to have their sighting animated. I can't guarantee I will, but I certainly take a look at everyone who gets in contact with me. And I do my best to do their sightings justice where I do take those projects on. So apart from that, I'd just like to thank you very much, Ryan, for having me on the show, because I hope it'll open some new people's eyes to my channel so they can come and have a look and see what I've been working on.
Fantastic. And we'll just cut it there. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You could become a patron. You could become a YouTube member. You could give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below, or you can just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.